A chilling letter arrives in St. Mary Mead, threatening to expose Miss Marple's darkest secret of guilt she's hidden for 40 years. When a wealthy lord is poisoned, the clues point to a scandal from her past, tied to a lost friend and a stolen necklace. Can Miss Marple unravel the murder, outsmart a killer, and face her shame before her secret destroys her? Watch as she battles greed, fear, and betrayal in this gripping mystery. Subscribe and dive into the truth now. Chapter 1. The Whisper in St. Mary Mead. The morning sun peeked through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cottage, casting soft shadows on the worn oak table. St. Mary Mead hummed with its usual quiet charm. Birds chirped. The milkman's cart rattled down the lane, and the scent of fresh bread drifted from the bakery. But today, something felt off. Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and sharper mind, sat in her favorite armchair, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. Her fingers, usually busy with knitting, were still. A letter lay open on the table, its edges crumpled as if she'd read it a dozen times. The letter had arrived with the morning post, slipped between a bill and a note from her nephew Raymond. It was written in a spidery hand, the ink smudged in places, as if the writer had been in a hurry. The words were polite, but sharp like a knife hidden in a velvet glove. They spoke of a secret, something from Miss Marple's past, tied to a name she hadn't thought of in years, Arthur Langley. The letter hinted that this secret could ruin her, unless she solved a new mystery, a death in the village. Lord Edwin Harrow, a rich man who'd moved to St. Mary Mead only 6 months ago, had been found dead in his manor, poisoned. The letter ended with a warning: find the truth, or your shame will be shouted from the rooftops. Miss Marple's face stayed calm, but her heart gave a little jump. Arthur Langley. The name brought back memories of a summer long ago, when she was young and the world seemed kinder. She pushed the thought away. There was no time for daydreams. A man was dead, and someone thought they could scare her. They didn't know Jane Marple. She stood, smoothing her gray skirt, and tucked the letter into her pocket. The village would be buzzing with news of Lord Harrow's death. Gossip was like gold in St. Mary Mead, and Miss Marple knew how to mine it. She grabbed her hat, a sensible one with a small brim, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy smell of autumn leaves. As she locked her door, she noticed Mrs. Price, her nosy neighbor, peering over the hedge. "Good morning, Jane," Mrs. Price called, her voice sugary but eager. "Terrible news about Lord Harrow, isn't it?" Found stiff as a board in his study. "They say it's poison." Miss Marple smiled politely. "Good morning, Ellen. Yes, very shocking." "I'm sure the police will sort it out." Mrs. Price leaned closer, her eyes gleaming. "Police bah. That Inspector Craddock's nice, but he's no match for a sneaky killer. You'll have it solved by tea time, I bet." Miss Marple gave a modest laugh. "You flatter me, Ellen. I'm just an old lady who likes to listen." But Mrs. Price wasn't wrong. Miss Marple had a knack for puzzles, especially the human kind. People talked, and she listened. A stray word, a nervous glance, those were the threads she wove into answers. As she walked down the lane toward the village square, she thought about Lord Harrow. He'd been a mystery himself, arriving in a shiny car with a staff of servants in a habit of keeping to himself. Some said he was a retired banker. Others whispered he'd made his fortune in shady deals. Either way, he'd stirred up St. Mary. Mead like a fox in a henhouse, the square was alive with chatter. Women stood in knots outside the butcher's shop, their voices low but excited. Men lingered by the pub, shaking their heads. Miss Marple caught snatches of talk as she passed. "Poison in his tea, they say. Never trusted that nephew of his. Heard he was digging into old village secrets." She stopped at the post office to buy stamps, knowing it was the best place for news. Miss Hartnell, the postmistress, was a fountain of gossip, though she called it keeping informed. Today she was in fine form, her round face flushed as she sorted letters. "Miss Marple," she said, spotting her. "Have you heard? Lord Harrow's gone and got himself murdered." They found him slumped over his desk, a cup of tea spilled. "Everywhere. Dr. Haydock says it's arsenic or some such nastiness." Miss Marple nodded, her face grave. "Dreadful business." "Do they know who might have done it?" Miss Hartnell lowered her voice, though the post office was empty. "Well, there's talk. That nephew, Charles Harrow, was always sniffing around for money. And the housemaid Rose, her name is, she's got a shifty look. Then there's Mr. Gibbs, the historian. He and Lord Harrow had a row last week about some old papers Harrow bought." Miss Marple filed the names away. "Charles Harrow, Rose, Mr. Gibbs, each a piece of the puzzle. Old papers?" she asked, keeping her tone light. "Oh, yes, Miss," Hartnell said, warming to her tale. "Gibbs said they were village records, but Harrow wouldn't let him see them. Said they were private, my foot, probably hiding something juicy." Miss Marple thanked her and left, her mind turning. Papers, secrets, poison. And that letter burning a hole in her pocket. She needed to see the crime scene. Inspector Craddock would be at Harrow Manor, and he was kind enough to let her poke around, even if he teased her about her hobby. The walk to Harrow Manor took her past golden fields and hedgerows heavy with berries. The manor stood at the edge of the village, a gray stone giant with tall windows and ivy creeping up its walls. It looked grand but lonely, as if it knew it didn't belong. A police car was parked outside, and a young constable stood by the gate, looking bored. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat. "Inspector's inside. Said you might come by." She smiled. "Thank you, Tom. I won't get in the way." Inside, the manor was all dark wood and polished floors, but it felt cold, like a house that hadn't been loved. Inspector Craddock met her in the hall, his face tired but friendly. He was a sturdy man with a quick mind, though he sometimes missed the small things. "Miss Marple," he said, shaking his head. "I should have known you'd turn up. Care to see the scene?" "Not that there's much to see." "I'd like that," she said, "just to get a sense of things." He led her to the study, a large room with bookshelves and a heavy desk. Lord Harrow's body was gone, taken for examination, but the room told its own story. A teacup lay on its side, its contents staining the rug. Papers were scattered on the desk, and a faint smell of smoke hung in the air. Miss Marple's eyes went to the fireplace, where a pile of ashes sat, the edges of a photograph curling in the soot. "Arsenic, Dr. Haydock thinks," Craddock said, scratching his chin. "Mixed in his tea. No one else in the house was sick. So it was meant for him. Trouble is, half the village had a reason to dislike him." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze sweeping the room. The photograph in the fireplace caught her attention. She stepped closer, peering at the ashes. The image was mostly gone, but a corner showed a young woman's face, her eyes familiar. Her heart skipped. Could it be? Find something? Craddock asked. "Just ashes," she said quickly, straightening. "Anything in his papers?" "Mostly business stuff," Craddock said, "but his diary's odd. Last entry says, the debt must be paid." "Cryptic, eh?" "Very," Miss Marple murmured. "A debt, Arthur Langley, the letter. It was all connected. But how?" She spent a few more minutes looking around, noting the locked drawer in the desk, the faint scratch marks on its edge, as if someone had tried to pry it open. She didn't mention it to Craddock. Not yet. She needed to think, to let the pieces settle down as she left the manor. The letter felt heavier in her pocket. Back at her cottage, she sat by the fire, rereading it. The words were like a snake, coiling around her thoughts. Arthur Langley had been a friend, a kind young man with dreams of adventure. They'd met one summer when she was barely 20, staying with her aunt in a nearby village. He'd been accused of stealing a necklace from a wealthy family. The Darlings. He swore he was innocent, but no one believed him. He vanished soon after, and Miss Marple, young and unsure, hadn't known how to help. She'd always wondered what happened to him. Now, someone knew, and they were using it against her dot. She sipped her tea, now cold, and stared into the fire. Lord Harrow's death was no accident. Someone had planned it, someone who knew too much. Charles Harrow, the greedy nephew. Rose, the shifty housemaid. Or Mr. Gibbs, with his grudge over old papers. And what was Harrow digging into? Village secrets, Miss Hartnell had said. Secrets like Arthur's. Miss Marple set the letter down. She wasn't afraid not yet, but she was curious, and that was dangerous in its own way. She'd solve this mystery not because of the threat, but because it was what she did. People underestimated her, saw only a frail old lady with a fondness for knitting. They didn't see the mind that could unravel lies like a ball of yarn dot outside. The village settled into evening. Lights glowed in windows, and the air grew cool. Miss Marple pulled her shawl tighter and made a plan. Tomorrow she'd talk to Dolly Bantry, her friend who knew every rumor worth knowing. She'd visit the church, where Mr. Gibbs often worked on his history projects. And she'd keep an eye on Rose, who might know more than she let on. The letter was a challenge, but Miss Marple had faced worse. She'd find the killer, and she'd face her past. Whatever secret they thought they had, it wouldn't stay hidden. For long, not from her dot as the fire crackled, she picked up her knitting, her needles clicking softly. The puzzle was just beginning, and Jane Marple was ready to solve it. Chapter 2. The scene of the crime. The morning after the mysterious letter arrived, Miss Jane Marple walked the winding path to Harrow Manor, her sensible shoes crunching on gravel. St. Mary Mead was still buzzing with talk of Lord Edwin Harrow's death poisoned, they said, in his own study. The letter in her pocket felt like a stone, its words about her past and Arthur Langley pulling at her thoughts. She pushed them aside. A puzzle needed solving, and the manor held the first pieces. The air was sharp, smelling of damp earth and fading roses. Harrow Manor loomed ahead, its gray stone walls heavy under the cloudy sky. Ivy clung to the windows like secrets refusing to let go. A police car sat by the gate, and young Constable Tom waved her through with a shy grin. "Inspector Craddock's expecting you, Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat. "He's in the study, poking around." "Thank you, Tom," she replied, her voice soft but steady. She adjusted her hat, a plain one, with a single feather, and stepped inside. The manor's grand hall swallowed the light, its dark wood panels and high ceiling making it feel more like a museum than a home. A chandelier hung above, its crystals dull with dust. Miss Marple's eyes flicked over the details: a scuffed rug, a vase of wilted flowers, a servant's cap left on a side table. Small things, but they told a story. This house wasn't loved, only lived in. Inspector Craddock met her at the study door, his broad face creased with worry. He was a good man, quick to act but slower to think. He liked Miss Marple, even if he sometimes rolled his eyes at her village wisdom. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, rubbing his neck. "Didn't take you long to show up. Care to see where it happened?" "Not much to look at, mind you." "I'd appreciate it," she said, her smile polite but firm. "Sometimes the smallest things matter most." He nodded and led her into the study. The room was large, with tall bookshelves and a wide desk that looked older than the house itself. A heavy curtain blocked half the window, casting shadows over the rug where a tea stain spread like a dark bruise. Lord Harrow's body was gone, taken to Dr. Haydock for tests, but the scene still whispered of death. A teacup lay tipped over. On the desk, its handle chipped. Papers were scattered, some crumpled, as if someone had searched in a hurry. A faint smoky smell lingered, and Miss Marple's gaze went straight to the fireplace. Ashes piled there, with the burnt corner of a photograph poking out. Arsenic. Most likely, Craddock said, pointing at the cup. Mixed in his tea. Nasty stuff. Only he drank it, so the killer knew his habits. We're questioning the staff, but they're a tight-lipped bunch. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes roaming. The photograph in the fireplace tugged at her. She stepped closer, pretending to adjust her shawl, and squinted at the ashes. The image was mostly gone, but the visible scrap showed a young woman's face sharp. Cheekbones, a familiar tilt to the jaw. Her breath caught. It looked like someone she'd known long ago, but the memory was fuzzy, like a dream half forgotten. Arthur Langley's face flashed in her mind, young and laughing from that summer. 40 years passed. Could the photo be tied to him? See something? Craddock asked, watching her. Just ashes, she said smoothly, stepping back. Anything in his papers? Craddock shrugged. Bills, letters, business deals. He was rich, but not well liked. His diary's the odd bit. Last entry says, the debt must be paid. Mean anything to you? She tilted her head as if thinking it over. Not yet. But it sounds personal. Personal's right, Craddock muttered. Half the village had a grudge against him. His nephew, Charles, was always asking for money. The housemaid, Rose, acted jumpy when we questioned her. And Mr. Gibbs, that historian fellow, had a shouting match with Harrow last week over some old papers. Miss Marple tucked the names away. Charles, Rose, Gibbs, each a thread in the web. She moved to the desk, her fingers brushing the scattered papers. A corner of one sheet caught her eye, a list of names, some crossed out. One name stood out, Darling. The family Arthur had been accused of stealing from. Her heart gave a little thud, but her face stayed calm. These papers, she said, did they mention anything about the village? Old families, perhaps? Craddock frowned. Not that I saw. Why? Just curious, she said, her tone light. Lord Harrow was new here. Perhaps he was digging into local history. Maybe, Craddock said, but he looked skeptical. If you spot anything we missed, you'll tell me, won't you? Of course, she said, though she knew she'd keep some thoughts to herself until they made sense. She spent a few more minutes in the study, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. The desk drawer was locked, with faint scratches around the keyhole, as if someone had tried to force it open. A single hairpin lay on the rug nearby, half hidden by the desk shadow. She didn't touch it, but noted its curve, the kind a young woman like Rose might use. The bookshelves held dusty tomes on finance and law, but one shelf had a gap, as if a book or something else had been taken. And the curtain, heavy and green, had a small tear at the hem. Barely noticeable unless you looked close-dot as she left the study, Craddock walked her to the hall. You'll be poking around the village, I suppose? He said, half teasing. Might have a chat with a few friends, she admitted. People talk, you know? He chuckled. That they do. Just don't solve this before I do, eh? She smiled, but said nothing. Solving was what she did, whether she meant to or not, outside. The clouds had thickened, and a chill wind tugged at her scarf. She took the long way back to the village, her mind turning over what she'd seen. The photograph in the fireplace haunted her. Was it someone from Arthur's time? The Darlings, perhaps? And that diary entry, the debt must be paid. It echoed the letter's threat, tying Harrow's death to her past. Someone knew something, and they wanted her to dig it up, or bury it deeper back in St. Mary Mead. The square was quieter now, the morning gossipers gone to their chores. Miss Marple stopped at the tea shop, a cozy place run by Mrs. Baker, whose scones were as famous as her loose tongue. The bell jingled as Miss Marple entered, And Mrs. Baker looked up from wiping the counter. "Jane Marple," she said, her round face bright. "Come to talk about poor Lord Harrow?" "Everyone's saying it's murder, poison, no less." Miss Marple settled at a corner table, ordering tea and a scone. "It's dreadful, isn't it? Have you heard anything interesting?" Mrs. Baker leaned in, her voice dropping. "Plenty. That nephew, Charles, was at the pub last night, drinking like a fish. Said his uncle owed him a fortune. And Rose, the housemaid, she was in here yesterday, looking like she'd seen a ghost. Dropped a tray when someone mentioned Harrow's name." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her face thoughtful. "And Mr. Gibbs? I hear he and Lord Harrow didn't get along." "Oh, Gibbs was furious," Mrs. Baker said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Came in here ranting about some papers Harrow bought old village records, he said. Gibbs wanted them for his history book, but Harrow wouldn't share. Called them private business?" Miss Marple nodded, her mind clicking like knitting. "Needles. Papers again. The same ones Miss Hartnell mentioned. And Rose's nerves, guilt, fear, or something else." She finished her tea, thanked Mrs. Baker, and stepped back into the street. The village felt different now, its calm surface hiding sharp edges. She thought of the letter, its spidery handwriting accusing her. Arthur Langley's name burned in her memory. 40 years ago, Arthur had been a friend, a bright young man with a quick laugh. They'd met at her aunt's house, where he worked as a gardener's helper. He was kind, always telling stories of sailing to far-off places. Then the Darlings accused him of stealing a necklace, a gaudy thing with emeralds. He swore he was innocent, but the evidence, a witness, a pawn jump piled against him. He ran before the police could arrest him, and Miss Marple, barely 20, hadn't known how to help. She'd felt guilty ever since, wondering if she could have done more. The letter's writer knew that guilt. But how? She reached her cottage as the first raindrops fell, pattering on the roof like impatient fingers. Inside, she lit the fire and pulled the letter from her pocket. Its words were no softer in the firelight. "You let Arthur Langley fall. Solve this murder, or your secret will be known." She folded it carefully, her hands steady. Fear wouldn't help. She needed answers. Sitting by the fire, she thought of the study, the ashes, the hairpin, the scratch drawer. Each was a clue, small but sharp. Charles Harrow, greedy and desperate. Rose, nervous and secretive. Gibbs, angry over papers that might hold village secrets. And Harrow himself, digging into something dangerous enough to get him killed. The diary's words, "The debt must be paid," rang like a bell. A debt to whom? Arthur? The Darlings? Or someone else? Miss Marple picked up her knitting, the needles clicking softly. Tomorrow, she'd visit Dolly Bantry, who knew every scandal in St. Mary Mead. She'd watch Rose, maybe catch her off guard. And Gibbs' his papers might hold a key. The puzzle was growing, its pieces scattered but coming into focus. She wasn't just solving a murder. She was chasing her own past, and someone wanted her to find it or fear it. The rain fell harder, drumming on the windows. Miss Marple knitted on, her mind as sharp as the needles in her hands. Lord Harrow's killer was close, and so was the truth about Arthur Langley. She'd find both, no matter what it cost. Chapter 3. Shadows of the past the rain had stalked by morning, leaving St. Mary Mead sparkling under a pale sun. Puddles dotted the lanes, and the air smelled of wet grass and chimney smoke. Miss Jane Marple sat at her kitchen table, the mysterious letter folded beside her untouched tea. Its words about Arthur Langley and her secret gnawed at her, pulling her back to a summer 40 years gone. She needed answers, but first she had a murder to solve. Lord Edwin Harrow's death poisoned in his study was no simple crime, and the clues she'd found yesterday at Harrow Manor were like threads waiting to be woven. Today she'd tug at those threads, She tucked the letter into her pocket, put on her coat, and grabbed her umbrella just in case. Her plan was simple: talk to the villagers, listen to their chatter, and piece together what Lord Harrow had been up to. The letter's threat hung over her, but Miss Marple wasn't one to scare easily. She locked her cottage door and set off. Her steps steady despite the ache in her knees. The village was waking up. Mrs. Price, her nosy neighbor, was sweeping her porch, her eyes darting for gossip. "Morning, Jane," she called. "Heard anything new about Lord Harrow? They say his nephew's already eyeing the manor." Miss Marple smiled. "Good morning, Ellen. People do talk, don't they? I'm sure the truth will come out." Mrs. Price huffed, disappointed by the vague reply, and Miss Marple moved on. The square was busy with shoppers, their voices mixing with the clink of coins at the butcher's and the baker's. She headed for the church, where Mr. Gibbs, the historian, often worked on his village records. If Harrow had been digging into old secrets, Gibbs might know something. But first, she stopped at the vicarage, hoping to catch Dolly Bantry. Her friend who missed no rumor worth hearing. Dolly was in her garden, pruning roses with a pair of rusty shears. She was a tall woman with a loud laugh and a knack for knowing everyone's business. When she saw Miss Marple, her face lit up. "Jane, you old sleuth," Dolly said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Come to pick my brain about that Harrow?" "Business? Sit down, I'll get tea." They settled on the vicarage porch, the table cluttered with cups and a plate of biscuits. Dolly poured tea, her eyes gleaming. "Poison, they're saying. Right in his tea. Who'd have thought St. Mary Mead would see such a thing?" "It's shocking," Miss Marple agreed, sipping her tea. "What's the village saying?" "Lord Harrow was a stranger here. Did he make enemies?" Dolly leaned forward, her voice low. "Enemies? Plenty. Charles Harrow, that nephew, was always at him for money. Came to the manor begging, they say, and left red-faced. Then there's Rose, the housemaid. Quiet girl, but sneaky. Mrs. Baker saw her crying in the tea shop the day before Harrow died. And Mr. Gibbs, oh, he was furious. Harrow bought some old papers Gibbs wanted for his history book. Wouldn't let him near them." Miss Marple nodded, her mind clicking. The same names kept popping up: Charles, Rose, Gibbs, and those papers again. "What kind of papers?" she asked, keeping her tone casual. "Village records, I think," Dolly said. "Deeds, wills, family trees." Gibbs said they were priceless, but Harrow called them private. Private, my foot. He was probably hiding something juicy. Miss Marple filed that away. Papers about families. The name Darling from Harrow's desk flashed in her mind, tied to Arthur Langley's old scandal. She changed the subject, not wanting to seem too eager. "Anyone else with a grudge?" Dolly thought for a moment. "Well, there's Dr. Haydock. He and Harrow argued about land Harrow wanted to buy. Said it'd ruin the village. But poison? That's not Haydock's style." They chatted a bit longer, Dolly sharing tidbits about the manor staff, a cook who grumbled about Harrow's stinginess, a gardener who swore he saw someone lurking the night of the murder. Miss Marple listened, her face calm but her mind racing. When she left, she felt the puzzle growing, its pieces sharper but not yet fitting. Her next stop was the church, a stone building with a squat tower and stained glass windows that glowed. In the sunlight, Mr. Gibbs was there, as expected, hunched over a table in the vestry, surrounded by dusty books and yellowed papers. He was a thin man with a sour face, his glasses slipping down his nose. He looked up as Miss Marple entered, his expression wary. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice clipped. "What brings you here?" "Not more questions about Harrow, I hope." She smiled, settling into a chair. "Just a chat, Mr. Gibbs, I hear you." And Lord Harrow had a disagreement about some papers. Village history, was it? Gibbs stiffened, his fingers tightening on a pen. He had no right to those documents. They belonged to St. Mary Mead, not some outsider. Deeds, letters, genealogy, centuries of our past. He bought them from an estate sale and locked them away. Said they were for research. He was no scholar. Miss Marple tilted her head. What families were in those papers? Old ones, I suppose. Gibbs hesitated, then shrugged. The usual lot. Darlings, prices, Bantries. Nothing special, but they're ours. He wouldn't even let me catalog them. The name Darling hit her like a pebble in a pond. She kept her face neutral. How odd. Did he say why he wanted them? No, Gibbs snapped. Just smirked and said they'd settle a debt. Arrogant fool. Miss Marple thanked him and left, her thoughts swirling. The Darlings again. Arthur Langley had worked for them, accused of stealing their necklace. Harrow's diary had mentioned a debt, and now Gibbs echoed it. Was Harrow digging into the Darling family, and why threaten her with Arthur's name? As she walked back to her cottage, the past crept up like a shadow. She let herself remember that summer, 1910, when she was 20 and staying with her aunt in Mead, a village near St. Mary Mead. Arthur Langley was 19, a gardener's helper with bright eyes and big dreams. They'd met at a village fair where he'd won her a ribbon at a game. They talked for hours about books, the sea, the future. He was kind, not like the stuffy boys her aunt pushed her toward. They became friends, meeting by the river to share stories. Then the Darling's necklace went missing. A maid swore she saw Arthur near the safe. A pawnbroker claimed he'd sold an emerald. Arthur begged Miss Marple to believe him, his face pale with fear. She did, that she was young, powerless. He fled. Before the police came, and she never saw him again. The guilt had stayed, a quiet ache she'd buried. She shook off the memory as she reached her cottage. Inside, she lit the fire and sat with her knitting, the needles clicking like a clock. The letter's threat was clear. Someone knew about Arthur, knew she'd cared for him, knew she'd done nothing to help. But how? And why connect it to Harrow's murder? Her thoughts turned to the study, the burnt photograph, the scratched drawer, the hairpin. The ashes haunted her most. That woman's face, could it be Mrs. Darling, the matriarch who'd accused Arthur, or someone else from that time? She needed to see Rose, the housemaid. Dolly said she'd been crying nervous. A girl like that might drop a hairpin, might know what Harrow was hiding. Miss Marple decided to visit the manor again, but not officially. She'd go as a kindly old lady, bringing scones for the staff. Servants talked when they felt safe, and she was good at making people feel safe. She baked a batch, wrapping them in a cloth, and set out in the afternoon. The manor looked even gloomier now, its windows dark under the gray sky. She knocked at the back door, where the servants entered. Rose answered, a slim girl with pale skin and dark hair pinned up. Her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying. Yes, she said, her voice shaky. Good afternoon, dear, Miss Marple said, holding out the scones. I thought you all might like a treat, with everything going on. Rose hesitated, then took the bundle. Thank you, ma'am. That's kind, Miss Marple smiled. It's a sad time. You worked for Lord Harrow, didn't you? Must be hard. Rose nodded, her fingers twisting her apron. He was strict, but fair, I suppose. Did he have many visitors? Miss Marple asked, her tone gentle. I hear his nephew came often. Charles? Yes, always asking for money. Rose's voice dropped. They fought the day before, you know. Miss Marple tilted her head. That must have been upsetting. Did Lord Harrow seem worried about anything? Papers, perhaps? Rose's eyes flicked to the side, nervous. He was always locking things away, diaries, letters, said they were private. I shouldn't say more. Of course, dear, Miss Marple said, patting her arm. You've been very helpful. She left, her mind buzzing. Rose knew something, maybe about the papers or the locked drawer. That hairpin, had she tried to open it? And Charles fighting with Harrow. Greed was a strong motive, but so was fear. Back home, Miss Marple sat by the fire, the letter in her lap. She reread it, the spidery handwriting cold and sharp. You let Arthur Langley fall. The words stung, but they also lit a spark. She wasn't that helpless girl anymore. She'd failed Arthur once, but she wouldn't fail now. Harrow's death, the papers, the photograph, they were all tied to her past, and she'd unravel at dot. She thought of the suspects. Charles, desperate for money, maybe desperate enough to kill. Rose hiding something, her nerves betraying her. Gibbs, bitter over papers that might hold secrets about the Darlings. And Harrow himself, digging into old debts. The diary's words, the debt must be paid, felt like a key, but to what lock? As evening fell, the village grew quiet, the lights and windows soft against the dusk. Miss Marple knitted, her needle steady. Tomorrow she'd dig deeper. She'd talk to Dr. Haydock, who'd argued with Harrow. She'd watch Charles, see if his greed showed in his eyes. And Rose, she'd find a way to make her talk. The puzzle was taking shape, and Miss Marple was no stranger to puzzles. She sat, her knitting down, and looked at the fire. Arthur Langley's face lingered in her mind, young and hopeful. She'd let him down once, but not again. Whoever wrote that letter thought they could control her. They were wrong. Jane Marple was coming for the truth, and nothing would stop. The fire crackled, and outside, the wind whispered through St. Mary Mead. The game was on, and Miss Marple was ready to play. Chapter 4. The village suspects the sun rose over St. Mary Mead, painting the rooftops gold and chasing away the morning mist. Miss Jane Marple stood at her cottage window, watching the village stir. The mysterious letter about Arthur Langley and her past sat heavy in her pocket, its threat tied to Lord Edwin Harrow's murder. She'd seen the crime scene, felt the weight of the burnt photograph and the scratched desk drawer, and heard whispers of suspects: Charles Harrow, the greedy nephew; Rose, the nervous housemaid; and Mr. Gibbs, the bitter historian. Today she'd dive into the village's gossip, pulling at the threads of their motives. People talked in St. Mary Mead, and Miss Marple knew how to listen. She dressed in her usual gray skirt and cardigan, pinning her hat with care. Her plan was to visit the tea shop and the church hall, where tongues wagged freely. Gossip was like a river, carrying bits of truth in its current, and she was ready to fish. As she stepped outside, the air was cool, smelling of damp leaves and fresh bread from the bakery. Mrs. Price, her neighbor, was already out, pretending to trim her roses, but clearly hunting for news. "Morning, Jane," Mrs. Price called, her eyes sharp. "Any word on that Harrow murder? They say the police are stumped." Miss Marple smiled, adjusting her gloves. "Good morning, Ellen. I'm sure Inspector Craddock's doing his best. It's a sad business." "Sad? My foot," Mrs. Price said, leaning over the fence. "That Charles Harrow's probably counting his uncle's money already. And that housemaid Rose, is it? She's got a guilty look, if you ask me." Miss Marple nodded, her face polite, but her mind noting every word. People do notice things, don't they? "I'll be off now, Ellen. Lots to do." She walked to the village square, where the day was in full swing. Women chatted outside the butcher's, their baskets heavy with meat and rumors. Men lingered by the pub, their voices low. Miss Marple caught snatches of talk. "Poison's a woman's trick, isn't it? Charles was at the manor that day, arguing loud enough to wake the dead. Gibbs said Harrow stole those papers fair and square." Her first stop was Mrs. Baker's tea shop, a warm place with checkered curtains and the scent of scones. The bell jingled as she entered, and Mrs. Baker looked up from the counter, her round face flushed with excitement. "Miss Marple," she said, wiping flour from her hands. "Come for tea and news? The whole village is talking about Lord Harrow. Poison right in his tea. Who'd do such a thing?" Miss Marple settled at a corner table, ordering tea and a slice of cake. "It's dreadful," she said, her voice soft. "What do people say?" "Lord Harrow wasn't here long, but he made waves." Mrs. Baker leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Waves? More like a storm. Charles Harrow was in here last week, grumbling about his uncle's will. Said he'd get nothing unless the old man died. And Rose, she's been jumpy as a cat, dropped a cup when I mentioned Harrow's death. Then there's Gibbs, stomping around like he's owed the moon. He and Harrow had a row over those papers' old family records, he said." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes thoughtful. "Family records? Any names mentioned?" Mrs. Baker shrugged. "Gibbs didn't say, but he was mad enough to spit, called Harrow a thief. Said those papers belonged to the village." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning. The darling's name kept circling, tied to Arthur Langley's old scandal. Were Harrow's papers about them? She steered the conversation gently. "Anyone else cross with Lord Harrow? Servants, perhaps?" "Oh, the staff hated him," Mrs. Baker said, warming to her tale. "The cook, Mrs. Lane, said he paid late and complained about her food. The gardener swore he saw someone sneaking around the manor the night Harrow died. And Rosewell, she's not herself. I saw her yesterday, staring at nothing, her hands shaking." Miss Marple thanked her and left, her thoughts buzzing. Rose's nerves were a clue, maybe guilt or fear. Charles's greed was plain, and Gibbs's anger over. The papers pointed to secrets. She needed more, so she headed to the church hall, where the Women's Institute was meeting. The hall was a hub of chatter, and no one knew village business like the ladies there. The hall smelled of polish and tea, its long tables covered with cups and plates of biscuits. Women bustled about, their voices a hum of news and opinions. Miss Marple slipped in quietly, greeted by nods and smiles. She joined a group near the tea urn, where Miss Hartnell, the postmistress, held court. "Jane Marple," Miss Hartnell said, her eyes gleaming. "You're here about the murder, aren't you? Poison's a nasty business." "Who do you think did it?" Miss Marple smiled, taking a biscuit. "I'm just listening, Clara. What's the talk?" Miss Hartnell lowered her voice, though the room was loud. "Charles Harrow's the one to watch. He was at the pub the night before, drunk and boasting he'd be rich soon. And Rose, she's hiding something. I saw her posting a letter yesterday, looking like she expected the police to grab her. Then there's Gibbs, whining about those papers. He told the vicar Harrow was digging into Scandal's old families, he said." Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump. "Scandals? Did he mention which families?" "Not exactly," Miss Hartnell said, "but he hinted at the Darlings. Said Harrow was obsessed with their history. Funny, isn't it? The Darlings left years ago." Miss Marple kept her face calm, but the name Darling hit hard. Arthur Langley had worked for them, accused of stealing their necklace. Was Harrow's murder tied to that old shame? She chatted a bit longer, gathering scraps. Charles had debts, Rose avoided questions. Gibbs was seen near the manor the day of the murder. Each piece sharpened the puzzle dot as she left the hall. A second letter arrived, slipped into her bag by an unseen hand. She found it when she stopped to adjust her scarf, the same spidery handwriting staring up at her. Her stomach tightened, but she waited until she was home to read it. In her cottage, with the fire crackling, she opened it. The words were colder this time. "You're close, but not close enough. Find the killer, or Arthur Langley's truth will bury you." She folded the letter, her hands steady. The threat was real, but so was her resolve. Whoever wrote it knew her guilt, her failure to help Arthur 40 years ago when he was accused and fled. They were using it to push her, but why? To solve the murder or to scare her silent? She sat with her knitting, the needles clicking as her mind worked. The village had given her suspects, each with a motive. Charles Harrow, drowning in debt, stood to gain from his uncle's death. Rose, with her shaky hands and dropped cups, might know more than she said maybe about the hairpin. Or the locked drawer. Gibbs, obsessed with his papers, could have snapped if Harrow's scandals threatened his work. And Harrow himself, digging into the darlings, had stirred a hornet's nest that her thoughts drifted to that summer. 1910. Arthur Langley's laugh, his stories of sailing, his gift of a wildflower crown. They'd been friends, nothing more, but her aunt had warned her to stay away. Gardeners weren't suitable. When the darling's necklace vanished, the village turned on Arthur. A maid swore he'd been near the safe. A pawnbroker claimed he'd sold an emerald. Miss Marple, young and shy, believed his pleas of innocence, but didn't know how to fight for him. He ran, and she'd carried the guilt ever since. The letter's writer knew that pain. But how? She set her knitting down and paced, the firelight dancing on the walls. The burnt photograph from Harrow's study haunted her. That woman's face sharp, cheekbones, familiar eyes. Was it Mrs. Darling who'd accused Arthur, or someone else from Dame Mead? The diary's words, "The debt must be paid," echoed the letter's threat. A debt to Arthur? To the Darlings? Or to someone still in? St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple decided to focus on Rose. The housemaid's fear was a loose thread, and she'd tug it gently. Tomorrow, she'd visit the manor again, maybe with more scones to loosen tongues. She'd also track down Charles, see if his boasts held clues, and Gibbs, his talk of scandals needed exploring. The papers he wanted me in that locked drawer, and the hairpin suggested someone had tried to open it. As evening settled, the village grew quiet, its lights soft in the dusk. Miss Marple made tea, her movements calm, but her mind racing. The puzzle was complex, but she'd solved harder. Charles, Rose, Gibbs each had a role, but who held the knife? Or rather, the poison? And why drag her into it, waving Arthur's name like a flag? She thought of the study again, the ashes, the hairpin, the scratched drawer. Small things, but they spoke loudly. The photograph was key. She needed to know who it showed. Rose might have seen it, or even burned it. Charles might know what his uncle was digging into. Gibbs might have read those papers before Harrow locked them away. The second letter lay on the table, its words a challenge. Miss Marple wasn't afraid, not yet. She was curious, and curiosity was her strength. She'd failed Arthur once, letting him vanish into shame. She wouldn't fail now. Whoever thought they could scare her didn't know Jane Marple. She picked up her knitting, the needles clicking like a heartbeat. Tomorrow, she'd weave the village's gossip into truth. She'd watch Rose's eyes, listen to Charles's bluster, probe Gibbs's anger. The murder was close, and so was the secret they thought they held over her. St. Mary Mead was small, but its shadows were deep, and Miss Marple knew how to walk them. The fire burned low, and outside the wind sighed. Through the trees, the game was growing sharper, and Miss Marple was ready for the next move. Chapter 5. The Locket's Clue. Morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a soft glow over St. Mary Mead. Miss Jane Marple stood in her cottage, folding a batch of freshly baked scones into a cloth. The second threatening letter, with its spidery handwriting and taunts about Arthur Langley, sat on her table, its words sharp as thorns. Lord Edwin Harrow's murder, poisoned in his study, was tangled with her past, and the village's gossip had pointed to 3 suspects: Charles, Harrow, the greedy nephew, Rose, the nervous housemaid. and Mr. Gibbs, the historian obsessed with stolen papers. Yesterday's chatter at the tea shop in Church Hall had sharpened the puzzle, but Miss Marple needed more. Today she'd return to Harrow Manor, hoping to coax answers from Rose and hunt for clues in the house itself. She slipped the letter into her pocket, its weight a reminder of the stakes. The burnt photograph, the scratched desk drawer, and the hairpin from the study haunted her thoughts. So did Harrow's diary entry. The debt must be paid. Was it tied to Arthur, the Darlings, or something else? She adjusted her hat, a simple one with a velvet band, and set out, the scones tucked under her arm. The village was quiet, its lanes damp from last night's rain. The air crisp with the scent of wet earth and wood smoke dot as she walked. Miss Marple's mind drifted to Arthur Langley. That summer of 1910, when she was 20, he'd been a friend kind, with a laugh that made her forget her aunt's strict rules. He'd been accused of stealing the Darling's necklace, framed by lies she couldn't disprove. She'd believed him innocent but hadn't fought for him. He'd fled, and the guilt had lingered like a shadow. The letter's writer knew that guilt, using it to push her toward solving Harrow's murder. But why? Harrow Manor loomed at the village's edge, its gray stone walls cold under the morning light. Ivy clung to its windows, and the garden was overgrown, as if the house had given up on charm. No police car stood at the gate today. Inspector Craddock must be elsewhere. Miss Marple knocked at the back door, where servants came and went. Rose answered, her pale face drawn, her dark hair pinned loosely. A strand fell free, and Miss Marple noted a hairpin like the one in the study. "Good morning, Rose," she said, holding out the scones. "I brought these for the staff. It's a hard time, I know." Rose took the bundle, her hands trembling. "Thank you, Miss Marple." "That's kind." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes gentle but sharp. "You look tired, dear. Is everything all right?" Rose's gaze darted away. "Just the shock, ma'am. Lord Her is deaf. It's upset us all." "Of course," Miss Marple said. "He was a private man, wasn't he? Always locking things away, I hear." Rose nodded, her fingers twisting her apron. "He kept his study locked. Papers, diary said no one was to touch them." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Did he ever mention old families?" "The Darlings, perhaps." Rose's eyes widened just for a moment before she looked down. I don't know, ma'am. I should get back to work." Miss Marple let her go, noting the fear in her voice. Rose knew something about the papers, the drawer, or maybe the photograph. As the door closed, Miss Marple slipped around to the manor's side entrance, a servant's door left unlocked. She wasn't one for sneaking, but the puzzle demanded it. The hall was dim, smelling of polish and neglect. She moved quietly, her steps soft on the creaky floor, and climbed the back stairs to the upper floors. The attic, she thought, might hold what the study hid. The attic door was at the end of a narrow hall, its paint chipped and lock rusty. It creaked open, revealing a dusty space cluttered with trunks, broken chairs, and cobwebs. Light slanted through a small window, catching motes of dust. Miss Marple stepped inside, her eyes scanning for anything out of place. A trunk in the corner caught her attention. Its lock was new, gleaming against the old wood. She knelt, her knees protesting, and examined it. The lock was scratched, like the desk drawer, as if someone had tried to force it. She had no key, but her knitting bag held a small pin. With a glance at the door, she worked the lock, her fingers steady from years of delicate tasks. It clicked open, and she lifted the lid. Inside were papers, letters, deeds, and a leather-bound book labeled genealogies. Tucked in a corner was a velvet pouch. Her heart quickened as she opened it, revealing a silver locket, its surface engraved with the initials A.L. Arthur Langley. Miss Marple's breath caught. She'd given Arthur this locket, a simple gift for his birthday. That summer, she'd saved her pocket money to buy it, wanting to cheer him after a hard week. He'd worn it proudly, saying it was his good luck charm. How had it ended up here in Harrow's attic? She opened it, her fingers trembling. Inside was a tiny folded note, its paper brittle. She unfolded it carefully, revealing a coded message. TD lies. Safe holds truth. She stared at the words, her mind racing. To Thomas Darling, the patriarch who'd accused Arthur. The safe, did it mean the Darling safe, where the necklace was kept? She tucked the locket and note into her pocket, her heart pounding. This was no coincidence. Harrow had found something about Arthur, something dangerous enough to get him killed. Footsteps echoed below, quick and heavy. Miss Marple closed the trunk, relocked it, and slipped out of the attic, her movements swift for her age. She was halfway down the stairs when Rose appeared, carrying a broom. The girl froze, her eyes wide. "Miss Marple," Rose gasped. "What are you doing here?" "I got turned around," Miss Marple said smoothly, her smile disarming. "Old houses are so confusing. I was looking for you, dear, to say goodbye." Rose didn't look convinced, but she nodded. "You shouldn't be up here. It's not safe." Miss Marple thanked her and left, the locket heavy in her pocket. Back in the village, she stopped at the library, a small building with sagging shelves and the smell of old paper. She needed to think, and the library's quiet was perfect. Settling at a table, she pulled out the locket and note, studying them. The code was simple, likely Arthur's way of hiding the truth. TD lies pointed to Thomas Darling, who'd sworn Arthur stole the necklace. Safe holds truth, suggested evidence, maybe in the Darling safe, long gone now. But why was the locket in Harrow's attic? She thought of the burnt photograph. The woman's face, could it be Mrs. Darling or someone tied to Arthur? And Rose, her fear, her hairpin, her reaction to the Darling's name. Was she connected to the locket? Miss Marple's mind turned to the suspects. Charles Harrow, greedy and desperate, might have killed for money, but the locket suggested a deeper motive. Gibbs, angry over papers, could have found something about the Darlings in his records. Rose, with her shaky hands, might have known what Harrow was hiding, maybe even tried to steal it. As she left the library, she saw Rose across the square, hurrying toward the train station with a small bag. Miss Marple's heart sank. Was she running? She followed at a distance, her steps quick but quiet. At the station, Rose bought a ticket, her face pale. Before she could board, Inspector Craddock appeared, his face grim. "Rose Miller," he said, "we need to talk. You're not leaving yet." Rose's bag slipped from her hands, spilling clothes and a small book. Miss Marple, standing nearby, saw the book's cover a diary, much like Harrow's. Craddock didn't notice. Focused on Rose, but Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. Rose was led away, her head down, and Miss Marple picked up the diary, slipping it into her bag. She'd return it later, but first, she needed to see what it held. Back at her cottage, she lit the fire and opened the diary. It was Rose's, filled with short entries about her work at the manor. One caught her eye. "He knows about it. Elle found the locket. If he tells undone." Another said, "Burn the photo. Can't let anyone see." Miss Marple's heart raced. Rose knew about Arthur, the locket, and the photograph. But why burn it? And what did she fear? She sat back, the locket in her hand. The puzzle was clearer now. Harrow had been digging into the Darlings, maybe into Arthur's case. The locket was proof of what? She wasn't sure. Rose's diary suggested she was protecting something or someone. Charles might still be the killer, driven by greed, but Rose's fear pointed to a deeper secret. Gibbs's papers could hold the key tying the Darlings to Harrow's debt. As night fell, St. Mary Mead grew still, its lights soft in the dark. Miss Marple knitted, her needles clicking steadily. Tomorrow she'd talk to Craddock, see what Rose said. She'd visit Gibbs again, ask about the darlings. And Charles, she'd watch him, see if his greed hit something darker. The locket was a clue, but also a wound, pulling her back to Arthur's face, his desperate pleas. She'd failed him once. Not again. The fire crackled, and the wind whispered outside. The murderer was close, and so was the truth about her past. Miss Marple was ready to face both, no matter what they cost. Chapter 6. A dangerous revelation. The evening sky over St. Mary Mead was heavy with storm clouds, the air thick with the promise of rain. Miss Jane Marple sat by her cottage fire, the silver locket engraved with A.L. resting in her palm. Its tiny note, "Tide lies, safe holds truth," burned in her mind, tying Lord Edwin Harrow's murder to Arthur Langley's disgrace 40 years ago. The second threatening letter, with its taunts about her failure to help Arthur, lay on the table, its spidery words daring her to solve the crime or face exposure. Rose's diary, found at the train station, had revealed her fear. She knew about the locket, had burned the photograph, and was hiding something big. Miss Marple's puzzle was sharpening. Charles Harrow, Rose, and Mr. Gibbs each held pieces, but danger was closing in. Tonight she'd share her guilt with a friend and face a new threat. She tucked the locket and letter into her pocket, her hands steady despite the knot in her chest. The village buzzed with news of Rose's arrest caught, trying to flee, her bag spilling secrets. Miss Marple needed to act fast. She'd visit Dolly Bantry, her oldest friend, whose sharp ears and warm heart made her the perfect confidant. Dolly could help unravel Rose's motives and might know more about the darlings. But first, Miss Marple needed to check her cottage. A nagging feeling telling her to secure her clues. She walked through her small home, locking windows and checking doors. The locket and Rose's diary went into a hidden tin under a floorboard, safe from prying eyes. As she straightened, a creak came from the back door, soft but deliberate. Her heart jumped, but her face stayed calm. She grabbed her knitting needle's knot, much of a weapon, but better than nothing, and crept to the kitchen. The door was ajar, a sliver of night visible. A shadow moved outside, quick and low dot. Miss Marple stepped back, her breath shallow. "Who's there?" She called, her voice firm. No answer, only the rustle of leaves. She pushed the door shut, locked it, and wedged a chair under the handle. Her hands shook, but her mind was clear. Someone knew she was close to the locket, the diary, the truth. She'd tell Inspector Craddock tomorrow, but tonight she needed Dolly. She grabbed her coat and umbrella, the storm clouds now spitting rain. The walk to the vicarage was short but eerie, the village lanes dark and slick. Lanterns glowed in windows, but St. Mary Mead felt watchful, its quiet hiding sharp edges. Miss Marple's thoughts churned. Rose's diary said she'd burned the photograph and feared Harrow's discovery of A.L. Charles, the nephew, was greedy, but was he desperate enough to kill? Gibbs, obsessed with his papers, might have stopped if Harrow's scandals threatened his work. And the locket, how had Harrow found it, and why hide it in the attic? At the vicarage, Dolly Bantry opened the door, her face bright despite the late hour. "Jane, you're soaked. Get in here before you catch your death." They settled in Dolly's cozy parlor, the fire crackling and a tray of tea and biscuits on the table. Dolly's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "You've got that look, Jane. What's the latest on Harrow's murder?" "Everyone's talking about Rose running off." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her hands warming on the cup. "It's a tangle, Dolly. Rose knows something, maybe about Lord Harrow's papers or a locket he hid. Charles is after money, and Gibbs is furious about stolen records, but there's more. Something personal. Dolly leaned forward, her voice soft. Personal? Jane, you're not mixed up in this, are you? Miss Marple hesitated, then set her cup down. The weight of 40 years pressed on her, and Dolly's kind face loosened the knot. I need to tell you something, Dolly. Something I've never shared. It's about a boy, Arthur Langley, from long ago. She told the story, her voice steady but low. The summer of 1910, when she was 20, shy and unsure. Arthur, a gardener's helper with a quick smile, who'd won her a ribbon at a fair, their friendship talks by the river, shared dreams of adventure. The darling's necklace stolen, and Arthur accused by a maid and a pawnbroker's lies. His desperate pleas, her belief in him, but her failure to act. He'd fled, and she'd carried the guilt ever since. She mentioned the locket given as a gift now found in Harrow's attic, and the threatening letters. Waving her shame like a flag. Dolly listened, her eyes wide. Jane, you were young. You couldn't have stopped it. But why bring it up now? Who's sending these letters? I don't know, Miss Marple said, her fingers twisting her shawl. But Harrow was digging into the darlings, maybe into Arthur's case. The locket proves it. Rose knew about it. She burned a photograph that might have shown the truth. Someone wants me to solve this murder, or they'll tell the village I let Arthur fall. Dolly's face hardened. That's blackmail, Jane. You can't let them scare you. You're the sharpest mind in St. Mary Mead. If anyone can crack this, it's you. Miss Marple smiled, a spark returning to her eyes. I don't scare easily, Dolly, but tonight someone tried to break into my cottage. They're watching. Dolly gasped. Break in? Jane, you must tell Craddock. This is getting dangerous. I will, Miss Marple said. Tomorrow. But first I need your help. What do you know about Rose, or the darlings? Anything from the old days? Dolly thought, her brow creasing. The darlings left Dame Mead years ago, after the necklace fuss. Thomas Darling was a bully rich, but cruel. His wife was quiet, always nervous. They had a daughter, but she married and moved away. As for Rose, she's new to the village. Came with Harrow's staff. Keeps to herself, but Mrs. Baker says she's got a temper when pushed. Miss Marple nodded, filing it away. A nervous Mrs. Darling, a daughter gone. Rose's temper. Small pieces, but they fit somewhere. She thanked Dolly and left. The rain now a steady drum on her umbrella. The village was silent, its shadows deep. She checked her surroundings, her heart beating faster than she'd admit. The attempted break-in had shaken her, but it also lit a fire. Whoever was behind this thought they could outsmart her. They were wrong. Back at her cottage, she checked the doors and windows again, the chair still wedged under the back door. She lit the fire and sat with her knitting, the needles clicking like a countdown. The locket, hidden in its tin, was the key. Its note, TD lies. Safe holds truth, pointed to Thomas Darling's false accusation against Arthur. The safe might have held proof of his innocence, but it was long gone. Or was it? Harrow's locked drawer, scratched and tempting, could hold answers. Her thoughts turned to Rose's diary. He knows about it all. Found the locket. If he tells, undone. Rose had burned the photograph, fearing its secrets. Was she protecting herself or someone else? Charles, with his debts and boasts, might have killed for money, but the locket suggested a deeper motive. Gibbs, angry over papers, could have uncovered something about the darlings in his records, something worth killing. And the letters, someone knew her past, knew Arthur's story, and was using it to steer her. Miss Marple set her knitting down, her mind racing. She needed to see Rose, hear what she'd told Craddock. She'd visit Gibbs again, ask about the darling's history, and Charles, she'd watch him at the pub, where loose tongues spilled truth. The attempted break-in was a warning, but also a clue. The killer was nervous, sloppy. They'd made a mistake, and she'd find it as the storm broke. Thunder rumbling over St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple made tea, her movements calm. The village slept, its secrets buried but not deep enough. She thought of Arthur, his face young and hopeful, his voice begging her to believe him. She'd failed him once, letting him run into the dark. Not again. The locket was her chance to right that wrong, and the letters were just noise. She sipped her tea, the firelight dancing on the walls. Tomorrow, she'd move carefully but boldly. Rose's fear, Charles's greed, Gibbs's anger, they were threads in a web, and she'd pull until it unraveled. The photograph's ashes, the locket's note, the diary's words, they all pointed to the darlings, to Arthur, to a debt unpaid. Harrow had stirred something deadly, and Miss Marple was close to its heart. The rain pounded the windows, and the wind howled, but Miss Marple was unafraid. She'd faced worse than storms and shadows. The killer was out there, and so was the truth about her past. She'd find both, no matter the cost. Her needles clicked again, steady as a heartbeat, as St. Mary Mead hid its secrets in the dark. Chapter 7. The trap is set. The morning sun broke through the storm's leftovers, casting a golden glow over St. Mary Mead. Miss Jane Marple stood in her cottage, sipping tea and staring at the silver locket engraved with Olive Arthur Langley's initials. Its tiny note, TD lies. Safe holds truth, pointed to Thomas Darling's false accusation against Arthur 40 years ago. The threatening letters, Rose's diary, and the burnt photograph tied Lord Edwin Harrow's murder to that old shame. Rose, the housemaid, knew about the locket and had tried to flee. Charles Harrow, the greedy nephew, and Mr. Gibbs, the bitter historian, were suspects, each with motives rooted in money, fear, or secrets. Last night's attempted break-in had shaken Miss Marple, but it also lit a fire. Today she'd set a trap at the village fete, using gossip to flush out the killer. She tucked the locket and letters into her hidden tin, safe under the floorboard. Rose's diary, with its confession about burning the photograph and fearing Harrow's discovery of et al., was there too. Miss Marple dressed in her best gray dress, petting her hat with a steady hand. The fete, held yearly in the church meadow, was perfect for her plan. Everyone would be there, Charles, Gibbs, even Rose, if Craddock had let her go. She'd spread a rumor that she'd found evidence, then watched the suspects' faces. Fear betrayed guilt, and Miss Marple was a master at reading it. She grabbed a basket of knitted scarves to sell at the fete, a cover for her snooping. The village was alive as she stepped outside, the air fresh with grass and baking bread. Banners fluttered in the square, and children ran with ribbons, their laughter mixing with the hum of setup. Mrs. Price, her nosy neighbor, was hanging bunting, her eyes hunting gossip. "Morning, Jane," Mrs. Price called, off to the fete. "Bet you've got the Harrow murder solved already." Miss Marple smiled, adjusting her basket. "Good morning, Ellen. Just helping out, you know. It's a lovely day for it." Mrs. Price leaned closer. "Lovely, sure, but everyone's talking." "About Rose. Craddock let her go, said there's no proof she poisoned Harrow. Think she did it?" Miss Marple kept her face calm. "I'm sure the truth will come out, Ellen. Gossip helps, doesn't it?" Mrs. Price grinned, and Miss Marple moved on, her mind sharp. Rose was free. That changed things. She'd be at the fete, nervous and watchful. Miss Marple's plan was simple. Plant a seed that she'd found a clue in Harrow's study, something that named the killer. She'd whisper it to Mrs. Baker, whose tea shop was gossip's heart, and let it spread. Then she'd watch Charles, Rose, and Gibbs for cracks. The church meadow was a riot of color stalls with jams, cakes, and crafts, a band playing jaunty tunes, and villagers milling about. Miss Marple set up her scarf stall near the tea tent, where Mrs. Baker was serving scones and chatter. She greeted her with a smile, leaning in as if sharing a secret. "Mrs. Baker," she said, her voice low. "I was at Harrow's study yesterday. Found something on a paper with a name on it. I think it points to the killer. I'll tell Craddock soon, but I wanted you to know." Double quotes. Mrs. Baker's eyes widened. "A name? Oh, Jane. Who was it?" Miss Marple shook her head. "I shouldn't say yet, but it's big. Keep it quiet, please." She knew Mrs. Baker couldn't keep quiet. By noon, the rumor would be everywhere. Miss Marple busied herself at her stall, her eyes scanning the crowd. Charles Harrow was at the cider tent, laughing too loudly, a glass in his hand. Rose stood by the cake stall, her face pale, her hands twisting her apron. Gibbs was near the bookstall, arguing with the vicar about village history. Each was in her sights. She moved through the fete, chatting with villagers and dropping hints about her discovery. To Miss Hartnell, she mentioned a hidden note in Harrow's desk. To Dolly Bantry, who joined her for tea, she whispered about proof that changes everything. Dolly, sharp as ever, played along, promising to spread the word. By mid-afternoon, the fate hummed with the rumor. Miss Marple had cracked the case. She returned to her stall, her heart steady but her senses alert. Charles was now at the pub tent, his face red from drink. He glanced her way, his eyes narrowing, then turned back to his mates. Rose had moved to the flower stall, her hands shaking as she arranged roses. Gibbs was pacing by the church gate, his sour face tighter than usual. Miss Marple waited, her knitting in her lap, the needles clicking like me-tro men, Eastot. The first crack came from Gibbs. He stormed over to her stall, his glasses slipping down his nose. "Miss Marple," he hissed, "what's this nonsense about a note? You've been poking into Harrow's papers, haven't you?" She looked up, her face mild. "Oh, Mr. Gibbs, just a little something I found." "Why? Does it worry you?" His cheeks flushed. "Worry? It's lies. Harrow stole those papers, village records, my work. If you've got proof, it's about him, not me." "Calm down, Mr. Gibbs," she said, her voice soothing. "I'm sure it's nothing. Unless you know something I don't." He sputtered, then spun away, muttering about meddling old women. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Gibbs was scared enough to confront her. He'd written the letters, she was sure. His obsession with the papers, his hints about the darlings, his anger at Harrow, if it. But was he a killer? Rose was next. She approached the stall, her face white, a scarf in her hand as if to buy it. "Miss Marple," she whispered, "is it true? You found something about Lord Harrow?" Miss Marple tilted her head, her smile kind. "Just a clue, dear. A name, maybe? Does that mean anything to you?" Rose's hands shook, the scarf slipping. "No, I don't know. I didn't do anything. You have to believe me." "Of course," Miss Marple said, patting her hand. "But if you know something, Rose, it's better to tell. Secrets hurt more when they're kept." Rose nodded, tears in her eyes, and hurried away. Miss Marple watched her go, her mind turning. Rose's fear was real, but not just guilt. She was protecting something maybe tied to the locket, the photograph, or Allie. Charles was harder to read. He stayed at the pub tent, drinking and laughing, but his eyes kept flicking to her stall. Miss Marple decided to push him. She walked to the tent, pretending to buy lemonade, and stood near him, her voice loud enough for his friends to hear. "It's a shame about Lord Harrow," she said to the barman. "But I found something in his study, a paper that names someone. The police will be interested." Charles's glass froze halfway to his mouth. His friends didn't notice, but Miss Marple saw the twitch in his jaw. He set the glass down, his voice casual but tight. "You're full of stories, Miss Marple. Found a killer, have you?" "Not yet," she said, her eyes meeting his. "But I'm close. Truth always comes out, doesn't it? He laughed, but it was forced. Sure, sure, let me know when you catch him. She left, her heart racing. Charles was rattled, his greed showing cracks. Had he poisoned his uncle for money? Or was he hiding something deeper, tied to the locket? She returned to her stall, the fate now at its peak, the band playing and children darting through the crowd. Her trap was working, but she needed more. The confrontation came as the sun dipped low, painting the meadow orange. Gibbs returned, his face a storm. He leaned over her stall, his voice low but shaking. You've gone too far, Miss Marple. Spreading lies about evidence. I wrote those letters to warn you, not to hurt you. Harrow was digging into things old scandals, the darlings, things that don't concern you. Stop this, or you'll regret it. Miss Marple's heart jumped, but her face stayed calm. Letters, Mr. Gibbs? That's a serious thing to admit. Why warn me? What do you know about Arthur Langley? His eyes widened, and he stepped back. Nothing. I found papers, that's all. About the darlings, their lies. Harrow had them, and now you're stirring it up. Leave it alone. He stormed off, and Miss Marple let out a breath. Gibbs was the letter writer, driven by his obsession with village history. But his panic wasn't a killer's, it was fear of exposure. He knew about the darlings, maybe Arthur, but poison didn't fit his temper. As she packed her scarves, Charles approached, his steps unsteady from drink. He leaned close, his breath sour. You're clever, old lady, but you're playing with fire. That paper you found, it's nothing. Drop it, or you'll be sorry. She met his gaze, her voice soft but steel. Threats don't scare me, Charles. If you're innocent, you've nothing to fear. He smirked, but his eyes were nervous. He stumbled away, and Miss Marple knew he was hiding something, money, or maybe the locket's secret. Rose was nowhere to be seen, likely hiding after their talk. The trap had worked. Gibbs had confessed to the letters. Charles had shown his. Nerves, and Rose's fear was clear. But the killer was still out there. Miss Marple walked home as the fate wound down, the village glowing with lanterns. Her cottage was safe, no signs of another break-in. She lit the fire and sat with her knitting, the locket and diary in her hands. Gibbs's letters were a distraction, not the heart of the murder. Charles's greed was strong, but Rose's diary her fear of Aliel. And the burnt photograph felt closer to the truth. The locket's note, TD lies, pointed to the darlings and Harrow's diary. Debt must be paid, tied it all together. She thought of Arthur, his face young and desperate, begging her to believe him. She'd failed him, but the locket was her chance to make it right. Tomorrow, she'd push harder talk to Craddock, confront Rose, watch Charles. The killer was close, and so was the secret they thought they held over her. St. Mary Mead's. Meadow had been her stage, and the suspects had played their parts. Now she'd tighten the net. The fire crackled, and the village slept. Miss Marple's needles clicked, steady and sure, as she wove the truth from shadows. Chapter 8, The Truth Exposed. The evening air in St. Mary Mead was cool, carrying the scent of damp grass and chimney smoke. Miss Jane Marple stood in her cottage, the silver locket with Arthur Langley's initials. Safe in its hidden tin under the floorboard. The tiny note inside, TD lies, safe holds truth, had cracked the puzzle of Lord Edwin Harrow's murder, tying it to Arthur's disgrace 40 years ago. The threatening letters, Rose's diary, and the burnt photograph had led her here. To a final gathering at Harrow Manor, yesterday's trap at the Fete had exposed Mr. Gibbs as the letter writer and shaken Charles Harrow and Rose, the housemaid. Tonight, Miss Marple would reveal the killer in the manor's drawing room, with Inspector Craddock and the suspects present. Her secret, her failure to save Arthur, would come to light, but she was ready. She dressed in her best gray dress. her hands steady as she pinned her hat. The locket, Rose's diary, and the letters were in her bag, ready to lay out the truth. Her trap had worked. Gibbs's confession, Charles's threats, and Rose's fear had shown their hands. But the killer's motive ran deeper than greed or anger. It was tied to Arthur, the Darlings, and a debt unpaid. Miss Marple locked her cottage and walked to the manor, the village quiet under a starry sky. Lanterns glowed in windows, but St. Mary Mead held its breath, sensing the end of a dark tale. Harrow Manor loomed, its gray stone walls heavy in the moonlight. Inspector Craddock met her at the door, his face tired but curious. "Miss Marple," he said, "you're sure about this? Calling everyone here Charles, Rose, Gibbs, it's a bit dramatic, isn't it?" She smiled, her eyes sharp. "Sometimes, Inspector, a little drama brings out the truth. I've got it sorted, I think." He nodded, leading her to the drawing room, a grand space with velvet curtains and a roaring fire. The suspects were already there, seated stiffly. Charles Harrow, his face red from drink, Rose, pale and twisting her hands, and Mr. Gibbs, his glasses slipping as he glared. Dolly Bantry sat in a corner, her presence a comfort, her eyes gleaming with excitement. Craddock stood by the door, his notebook ready. Miss Marple took the center, her small frame commanding the room. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice clear. "Lord Harrow's death was no accident. He was poisoned with arsenic in his tea, and the killer is here. But this is also about an older crime, one that's haunted me for 40 years. Let's start there." She pulled the locket from her bag, holding it up. The firelight caught its silver, and Rose gasped softly. "This belonged to Arthur Langley, a friend from 1910. I was 20, living in Dane Mead. Arthur was kind, a gardener's helper with big dreams. He was accused of stealing a necklace from the Darlings' Thomas. And his wife, a maid, swore he was near the safe. A pawnbroker claimed he'd sold an emerald. He begged me to believe him, and I did, but I was young, powerless. He fled, and I've carried the guilt ever since." Charles shifted, his eyes narrow. Gibbs adjusted, his glasses, his face tight. Rose stared at the floor, her hands clenched. Miss Marple continued, her voice steady. "Lord Harrow was digging into the Darlings' history. He found this locket, hidden in his attic, with a note inside. TD lies. Safe holds truth. Thomas Darling lied about Arthur, framing him to cover something else. Harrow's diary said the debt must be paid. He was chasing that debt, and it got him killed." She turned to Gibbs, her gaze sharp. "Mr. Gibbs, you wrote the letters threatening me, didn't you? You admitted it at the fete, angry that Harrow stole your village records." Gibbs sputtered, his cheeks red. "Yes, I wrote them. Harrow had no right to those papers, deeds, genealogies, the Darlings' secrets. I found notes about Arthur Langley, his disgrace. I thought you'd meddle, ruin my work. But I didn't kill anyone." Miss Marple nodded. "I believe you. Your letters were a warning, not a murderous threat. But you knew about the Darlings' lies, didn't you?" Gibbs swallowed, nodding. Their wealth came from shady deals. Thomas Darling used Arthur as a scapegoat to hide a bigger theft jewels. He'd smuggled. The necklace was a cover. The room stirred, Charles snorting, Rose trembling. Miss Marple turned to Charles. "You, Charles, wanted your uncle's money. You fought with him the day before he died, demanding your share. You stood to gain from his death, didn't you?" Charles laughed, but it was shaky. "Sure, I wanted money. Who doesn't? But poison? That's not my style. I'm no killer." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. "Perhaps not. But you knew Harrow was digging into old scandals. Did you know about the locket?" Charles's face paled. "Locket? No, He was always locking things away. I didn't care about his papers. She let him squirm, then turned to Rose, her tone gentle. Rose, you're the key. Your diary. Said you burned a photograph because Harrow knew about. I know. You wrote, if he tells, I'm done. You tried to flee when I found the locket. Why? Rose's eyes filled with tears, her voice a whisper. I didn't kill him, I swear. Miss Marple stepped closer, holding out the diary. I believe you're not the killer, Rose, but you're hiding something. The photograph, who was in it? And why the locket? Rose broke, her sobs filling the room. It was my mother's picture. She was Arthur Langley's daughter. I'm his granddaughter. She grew up in shame, her father called a thief. She died last year, and I came here, working for Harrow, to find the truth. He found the locket, started asking about Arthur. I burned the photo her as a girl with him because I was scared he'd tell everyone, ruin her memory. Miss Marple's heart ached, but her mind stayed sharp. And the poison, Rose? You knew his habits, his tea. Did you want him silent? Rose shook her head, tears streaming. No, I hated him, yes. He was cruel, taunting me about Arthur, but I didn't poison him. I tried to open his dust drawer, looking for the locket. That's where the hairpin came from. But I didn't kill him. Craddock stepped forward, his face grim. Then who did, Miss Marple? You've got us all here. Who's the killer? Miss Marple turned to Charles, her eyes like steel. Charles, you're not as clever as you think. You didn't just want money. You knew about the locket, didn't you? Harrow told you he was rewriting his will, cutting you out because he'd found a debt to pay to Arthur's family, to Rose. You poisoned his tea, knowing he'd die before he could change it. Charles leaped up, his face twisted. That's nonsense. You've got no proof, old woman. Miss Marple held up a small vial from her bag, its label faded. I found this in the manor's garden, near the well. It's arsenic, Charles. Your fingerprints are on it. I had Craddock check. You dropped it the night you poisoned the tea, didn't you? Charles's bravado crumbled, his shoulders sagging. All right, yes. I did it. He was going to give everything to her. He pointed at Rose, some nobody's family. I deserve that money. I earned it, putting up with him. Craddock moved, handcuffs ready. Charles Harrow, you're under arrest for murder. Rose sobbed, Dolly gasped, and Gibbs looked stunned. Miss Marple stepped back, her face calm but her heart heavy. The room buzzed as Craddock led Charles away, his curses fading. She turned to Rose, her voice soft. Rose, I'm sorry about your mother, your grandfather. I failed Arthur too. But you're free now. The truth is out. Rose nodded, wiping her eyes. Thank you, Miss Marple. You gave him justice. Dolly rushed over, hugging Miss Marple. Jane, you're a wonder. But your secret everyone knows now. Are you all right? Miss Marple smiled, a weight lifting. I'm fine, Dolly. Secrets hurt when they're hidden. Let the village talk. I faced worse. Gibbs shuffled forward, his face sheepish. I'm sorry about the letters, Miss Marple. I was wrong. You're remarkable. She nodded, forgiving but firm. Keep your history honest, Mr. Gibbs. That's enough. The drawing room emptied, leaving Miss Marple with Dolly by the fire. She pulled the locket from her bag, its silver worm in her hand. I'll give this to Rose, she said. It's hers by right. Dolly squeezed her arm. You did right by Arthur, Jane. He'd be proud. Miss Marple walked home, the village quiet under the stars. Her cottage welcomed her, the fire low but warm. She placed the locket on the table, its note beside it. The letters, Gibbs's threats, were just paper now. She'd faced her shame, and it hadn't broken her. Arthur's memory was clear, his. Justice done, she sat with her knitting, the needles clicking softly. St. Mary Mead would talk, but gossip was just noise. The killer was caught, the debt paid. Tomorrow she'd bake for Rose, listen to Dolly's chatter, and watch the village settle. The puzzle was solved, but others waited, as they always did. The fire crackled, and the night was still. Miss Marple smiled, ready for whatever came next. Chapter 9. A quiet resolution. The morning sun spilled over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in soft gold. Dew sparkled on the grass, and the air carried the sweet scent of blooming roses and fresh bread. Miss Jane Marple stood in her garden, clipping lavender with steady hands. The silver locket with Arthur Langley's initials, Al, was gone, given to Rose, his granddaughter, as a token of justice. The threatening letters, Rose's diary, and the burnt photograph had led her to unmask Charles Harrow as Lord Edwin Harrow's killer, poisoned for greed and fear of a changed Will. Her secret, her failure to save Arthur 40 years ago, had been laid bare in the manor's drawing room, but the weight of guilt was lighter now. The village would gossip, but Miss Marple was at peace. Today she'd tie up loose ends and let St. Mary Mead settle. Though her sharp mind already sensed new puzzles waiting, she wore her usual gray skirt and cardigan, her hat pinned neatly. The lavender went into a basket, a gift for Dolly Bantry, who'd stood by her through the storm. The case was closed. Charles was in custody, his arsenic vial the final nail. Rose was free, her fear of exposure lifted. Mr. Gibbs, the letter writer, had apologized, his obsession with village records. Humbled, but Miss Marple wasn't one to rest. She'd visit Rose, check on Dolly, and keep her ears open. St. Mary Mead's calm hid ripples, and she knew how to read them. She locked her cottage and walked to the village square, the basket swinging gently. The lanes were alive with morning. Bustle children chasing a ball, women chatting over fences, the milkman's cart rattling by. Mrs. Price, her nosy neighbor, was sweeping her porch, her eyes gleaming for news. "Morning, Jane." Mrs. Price called, leaning on her broom. "Heard. You caught that Charles Harrow. Poison, was it? The whole village is talking about him and your old friend, that Langley boy. Quite a tale." Miss Marple smiled, her face calm. "Good morning, Ellen. Yes, it's done. Gossip does spread, doesn't it?" Mrs. Price grinned, unsatisfied but out of questions. Miss Marple moved on, her mind sifting the case's final threads. The locket's note, TD lies, safe holds truth, had pointed to Thomas Darling's frame-up of Arthur. Harrow's diary, the debt must be paid, showed he'd meant to right that wrong, giving his wealth to Rose's family. Charles, desperate to keep the money, had poisoned him. Gibbs's letters were a distraction, born of pride, not murder. Rose's fear had been for her mother's memory, not guilt. It all fit, but Miss Marple wondered about the Darling safe. Did it still hold Arthur's truth? Her first stop was the vicarage, where Dolly Bantry was in her garden, weeding with gusto. Dolly's face lit up as Miss Marple approached, the lavender basket in hand. "Jane, you hero," Dolly said, brushing dirt from her hands. "Come in. I've got tea ready. The village can't stop talking about you, solving a murder and spilling your own secret. Are you all right?" Miss Marple settled on the porch, the tea warm and the lavender scent soothing. "I'm fine, Dolly. Secrets hurt when they're hidden. Let them talk. I've faced worse." Dolly poured tea, her eyes soft. "You gave that girl, Rose, her grandfather's name back, and caught a killer. But Jane, those letters, that break-in, were you scared?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her smile faint. "A little. But curiosity is stronger than fear. Gibbs wrote the letters to protect his records, not to kill. Charles was the real danger. I'm just glad it's over." They chatted, Dolly sharing village whispers. Charles's arrest had shocked the pub. Rose was staying at the manor for now. Gibbs was quieter, his history book on hold. Miss Marple listened, her mind noting the calm. But Dolly's last words caught her. Mrs. Baker says Rose got a letter yesterday, not from the police. Looked like old handwriting, she said. Odd, isn't it? Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump, but her face stayed calm. Another letter? Not Gibbs's, surely. She filed it away, promising to check on Rose. She thanked Dolly, left the lavender, and headed to Harrow Manor. The basket now empty, but her purpose full. The manor stood grim, its ivy heavy and windows dark. No police guarded it now, the case closed. Miss Marple knocked at the back door, where Rose answered, her pale face softer but her eyes still wary. She wore a simple dress, her dark hair pinned up, a new hairpin gleaming. Miss Marple, Rose said, her voice quiet. Come in, I didn't expect you. Miss Marple smiled, stepping into the kitchen. I wanted to see how you're doing, dear. And I brought you something. She pulled the locket from her bag, its silver catching the light. This is yours, Rose, your grandfather's. Keep it close. Rose's eyes filled with tears as she took it, her fingers tracing the aisles. Thank you. You gave him back to me. I thought everyone would hate him, hate us. Miss Marple patted her hand. The truth sets us free, Rose. Arthur was innocent. Thomas Darling lied, and Harrow knew it. You're not alone now. Rose nodded, clutching the locket. Miss Marple hesitated, then asked, Rose, I heard you got a letter yesterday. Not from the police. Can you tell me about it? Rose's face tightened, but she pulled a folded paper from her pocket. It came this morning, no name, just old writing, like the ones you got. Miss Marple's heart sank as she took it. The spidery handwriting was new, not Gibbs's, but the tone was cold. The debt is paid, but the safe still holds secrets. Leave it buried. Her mind raced. The safe Arthur's note had mentioned it. Was it still out there, hiding proof of his innocence? And who wrote this? Not Charles, in jail. Not Gibbs, humbled. Someone else watching. She kept her voice steady. Thank you, Rose. Keep this safe and don't worry. I'll handle it. Rose nodded, her trust clear. Miss Marple left, the new letter in her pocket, its words a fresh puzzle. Back in the village, she stopped at the tea shop where Mrs. Baker was serving a crowd, her face bright with gossip. Miss Marple, Mrs. Baker said, waving her over. You're the talk of the town. Caught that Charles and all that talk about Arthur Langley. What's next? Miss Marple ordered tea her. Smile polite. Just resting, Mrs. Baker. Any news about the manor staff? Rose, perhaps? Mrs. Baker leaned in, her voice low. Rose is staying on, they say, till the estate's settled. Got a letter yesterday, looked shaken, but she wouldn't talk. And Gibbs was in here, quiet for once. Says he's giving up his book for now. Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning. The letter was spreading, but no one knew its sender. She thanked Mrs. Baker and left, heading home. The village was settling, its rhythm back to normal children playing, men at the pub, women at the market. But the new letter was a ripple, a hint of unfinished business dot at her cottage. She lit the fire and sat with her knitting, the needles clicking softly. She pulled out the new letter, rereading its words. The safe still holds secrets. The Darling's safe, long gone, or was it? Harrow's papers, locked in his drawer, might have mentioned it. Or Gibbs's records, still at the church. She thought of Arthur, his face young and pleading, the locket his only legacy. She'd cleared his name, but the safe's truth proof of his innocence might still be out there. Her thoughts drifted to the suspects, now cleared or caught. Charles the killer, driven by greed and fear of losing his inheritance. Rose, protecting her mother's memory, her fear mistaken for guilt. Gibbs, the letter writer, his pride humbled. But the new letter suggested someone else, someone tied to the Darlings, watching from the shadows. A descendant, perhaps, or a servant from that time, old but alive. She set her knitting down, her mind sharp. Tomorrow she'd visit Gibbs, ask about the Darlings' estate. She'd talk to Craddock, see if Harrow's papers mentioned a safe, and Rose, she'd watch her, make sure she was safe. The case was closed, but this new letter was a thread, pulling her toward another mystery dot as evening fell. Miss Marple. Made tea, the cottage warm and quiet. She thought of the Manor's drawing room, where she'd faced her shame and named the killer. The village knew her secret now, her failure to save Arthur, but it hadn't broken her. Gossip was just noise. And St. Mary Mead would move on. She burned Gibbs's letters in the fire, their ashes curling like the photographs. The new letter stayed in her bag, a challenge she'd face in time. She walked to her garden, the stars bright above. The lavender was gone, given to Dolly, but the roses bloomed, their scent a promise of spring. She thought of Arthur, his laugh, his dreams, now honored by Rose's locket. She'd failed him once, but not again. The safe secrets, if they existed, would wait. For now she'd done enough. Back inside, she sat by the fire, her knitting in her lap. The needles clicked, steady as her heart. St. Mary Mead was calm, but its shadows held stories, and Miss Marple was ready for them. She smiled, sipping her tea, the village sleeping under the stars. The puzzle was solved, but another whispered, and Jane Marple would answer when it called. The fire glowed, and the night was still. She was home, and all was well for now.